Learning challenges are identified in kids who struggle with skills like reading, math, staying organized, or paying attention. But many students with learning and attention disorders also have social and communication problems. When you're socializing, you have to understand what's been said, organize your thoughts, decide on a response, and find the right words to use. These steps can be difficult for children with learning problems. Kids with a nonverbal learning disorder might have problems understanding the rules around socializing. They can't easily see that everyone is behaving a certain way. They might miss jokes or not respond when spoken to. Children with ADHD or executive function challenges might understand what is happening, but have a hard time organizing their answer. They may have trouble listening to other kids without interrupting or waiting for their turn. Or they'll act inappropriately based on their impulses. Kids with dyslexia, they may have trouble making sense of complex language. It might also be hard for them to find the right words to use. To others, they may seem unsophisticated or immature. When kids struggle to learn, it can lower their self-esteem. They might have been told they're not trying hard enough, or they might worry that they're not as smart as other kids. If they're ashamed about their struggles, socializing can feel even harder. But with help, kids with learning challenges can build social skills. Make sure your child knows that they're just as smart as other kids. If they're getting the right support for their learning challenges, they will feel more confident. Working with a professional can also help kids learn social skills that don't come as naturally to them as they do to other kids. When we think of children with learning challenges, we think of difficulty with reading or math, with being organized, with paying attention, and staying focused in school. But many students with learning and attention disorders also have social and communication problems. They have trouble connecting with other kids, making friends, and understanding what's expected of them in social situations. Some of them miss social cues and misinterpret body language and tone of voice. Kids with learning disabilities may talk too much or at the wrong time, or say things that are inappropriate. Some are stiff in conversation, have trouble expressing themselves, and miss the point of a lot of humor. They don't get the things that seem to come effortlessly to other kids. They may have trouble understanding what's happening in a group and finding a way of fitting in. For children and teenagers, being just a little off in their social behavior can easily trigger rejection by their hyper-aware peers and make them targets of teasing and bullying. Sometimes young children with social awkwardness or deficits are misdiagnosed with autism because these behaviors are one component of an autism diagnosis. But it's important to recognize that these behaviors occur in a lot of kids who aren't on the spectrum too. The cognitive process. To understand the link between learning problems and social difficulties, it helps to think about the cognitive process that has to occur in a successful social interaction. A social interaction involves being presented with some new information or situation that calls for a response. We tend to think of those interactions as intuitive and instantaneous. You just know how to respond appropriately without thinking about it. But it's actually a multi-step cognitive process. You have to understand what's been said, organize your thoughts about it, prioritize the response you want to give, and retrieve the words to express it. If that description seems too cumbersome for something that happens in an instant for most people, it's helpful to think of it as comparable to a math problem. Someone very good at solving multi-step math problems can do one in her head automatically. Others of us might have to work through the steps sequentially. Similarly, if we break down those instantaneous social interactions into a set of steps, most of us are pretty good at performing those steps at lightning speed. But kids with social and communication problems can get caught up on some part of that cognitive process. This doesn't reflect on their intelligence, but on specific learning skills that they can't access automatically. The part of the process presenting a stumbling block may be different for different kids. When you see children who struggle to connect with other kids or to respond appropriately in social situations, their behavior may be superficially similar, but represent different underlying causes. A child might have trouble comprehending the new information or situation, organizing the information into the desired response, retrieving language to express that response. Problems with comprehension. Kids who have trouble with comprehension of social information include those with what we call nonverbal learning disorder. These kids have trouble picking up on social patterns and don't intuitively recognize the rules of social scenarios, whether it's a group of people they're joining, a greeting they need to respond to, or a joke that eludes them. They aren't able to fit it into a pattern that tells them what kind of behavior is expected. The good news is that kids who struggle with nonverbal learning tend to be good at rote learning. That means you can teach them the patterns they're missing. For instance, kids who have difficulty recognizing what facial expressions go with what emotions can be taught to match expressions with what they convey. They can practice until it becomes easy, but it'll always be mechanical instead of effortless. Problems with organization. Kids who have problems with executive functions, including those with an ADHD diagnosis, may comprehend the information they're trying to respond to, but have trouble organizing or prioritizing it. They may not choose the right stimuli to respond to, putting aside the question from the teacher, for example, and paying attention to the whispered comment from a classmate instead. Or they satisfy the impulse to say something rude because their brains are not pointing out the consequences will not be good. When these kids have a history of ignoring authority figures or blurting out something unacceptable, they get a lot of negative feedback. These kids are not socially clueless, they just don't necessarily make the right choices of which cues to respond to, or how to organize their response effectively. Self-regulation, or effective management of their own behavior, is something they need to work on. The goal is to get kids to understand how their weakness in executive functions affects their ability to connect with other kids just as much as their ability to do multi-step math problems. The goal is to help students become resilient and open to feedback when they make mistakes. Working on self-regulation in the same way that you work on math or reading comprehension is a project that kids can see as constructive if it's presented in a way that is positive rather than negative. Problems retrieving language. For kids with dyslexia, the problem usually doesn't lie in reading nonverbal signs or understanding social interactions and knowing how to respond appropriately. They may be very good at those things. But because basic decoding of language and following multi-step prompts is not effortless for them, they may have trouble with rapid word retrieval. This affects them not only when they're reading and writing, but also when they're speaking. Their speaking vocabulary isn't as well developed as other children their age, and their oral expression may be inexact and quirky because of trouble retrieving words or saying the wrong word. As a result, their ability to transact in language is compromised. While they might be good at the nonverbal dimension, as socializing becomes more and more verbal, they may come across as unsophisticated or immature, or somehow not quite with it to their peers. Lack of confidence. Self-confidence could be an issue for kids without any developmental problems at all, of course. But by the time children with serious barriers to learning have struggled through several grades where the main focus is on mastering reading and writing, their self-esteem can be severely damaged. If they haven't been diagnosed, they've probably been accused of not trying hard enough to learn, or to keep track of their backpacks or finish their assignments. And they've surely begun to worry that they're not as smart as other kids. Many children with ADHD or dyslexia, or both, try extra hard to keep other kids from seeing that they're struggling. For these kids, the first step is to help them understand that they're just as smart as other kids, and they can catch up to their peers with the right support. And of course, the next step is to provide that support, to help kids develop needed skills and strategies to work around the underlying problem so that they will have the opportunity to succeed, academically as well as socially. Thinking of awkward social behavior as a function of missing skills also diffuses situations where parents, teachers, and other adults tend to get upset, making the child's situation worse. In many schools, when there is an emotional confrontation between students and teachers, nobody's thinking clearly, which decreases the opportunity for learning. In these instances, it's best to take a step back and try to see the errors on both sides and remediate those errors as a skill-based, rational process. Thanks for joining me for this video. I'm Dr. Angela Dewey, a clinical neuropsychologist at the Child Mind Institute. To learn more about learning disorders, visit childmind.org/LD support. There you'll find everything you need to know about giving children with learning difficulties the tools and support they need to succeed, plus hundreds of articles and guides to help you support children who are struggling with mental health, behavior, or learning challenges.